From the very first day I moved into this house with Ethan, my husband, I knew things wouldn't be easy. The house was beautiful, spacious, with a porch out front and a backyard garden I'd always dreamed of. But along with the fresh paint, blooming flowers, and built-in cabinets came something. Or rather, someone I hadn't planned for. Ethan's mother, Helen. Helen had this remarkable ability to walk into a room and change the energy instantly. She called it being real, but to me, it felt more like being controlling. I always got the sense that she saw me as a guest in her space, even though I was folding laundry, cooking dinner, or planting basil in the backyard, things only someone who lives in a place would do. Everything started when Ethan and I decided it was time to buy a house after our wedding. We both worked hard, me as an office assistant at a law firm, and him as a computer technician. We'd been saving every penny for over 4 years. In the beginning, Helen seemed supportive. She kept saying she was proud that we were building a solid future. But the way she said it, there was something behind her eyes, something unspoken. When we finally found the house of our dreams, Helen insisted on giving us a little push. She said she had some money saved and wanted to help with part of the down payment. I'll admit at the time I was touched by her offer. Ethan thought it was fair too. We accepted her help with gratitude, but we made it clear the house would be ours. The deed would be in my name because Ethan still had some lingering student loan issues. It was a practical decision, logical, nothing more. But for Helen, I think it felt like an attack. She never voiced it directly, but I could feel it. As the months passed, Helen started making little comments to the neighbors. Things like, "This house turned out just the way I imagined it," or "They wouldn't be here if it weren't for me." What stung the most was when she referred to it as my house in front of others. At first, I brushed it off, thinking she was just proud. But people began looking at me differently, like I was just a guest, like I was living off someone else's generosity. One afternoon, I went to the grocery store, and sweet old Martha, our neighbor, mentioned something that made my stomach twist. "Your mother-in-law told me if it weren't for her, you two would still be in a tiny apartment. That she paid for everything." I smiled politely, like I hadn't just been slapped with words. But inside, I was fuming. I drove home replaying Martha's voice over and over in my head. I stared at the walls I had painted, the furniture I had picked out, the dining table I scrubbed every Sunday morning. I was done letting this go unaddressed. But the final straw came on a Sunday. Ethan, ever the peacemaker, thought a family lunch would help smooth things out. He invited Helen, and I, already exhausted from keeping the peace for so long, agreed. I cooked a full meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. I set the table with cloth napkins and fresh lemonade. The house looked warm and inviting. Helen arrived, of course, with her usual critiques. "Did you season the chicken enough? You should have steamed the beans, not baked them." I stayed quiet, smiled, bit my tongue. But then, right in the middle of lunch, my cousin Ellie complimented the house. "This house is just gorgeous, Olivia. You did such a great job." Helen didn't miss a beat. "Well, this lovely house wouldn't exist without me. Practically mine, really." Ethan nearly choked on his lemonade. I stopped chewing. Ellie blinked, stunned. I felt my hands tremble slightly under the table. But instead of snapping, I breathed slowly and spoke in the calmest voice I could muster. "Helen, would you mind repeating that?" She tilted her head, surprised by my tone. But before she could speak, I stood up and walked to the hallway drawer. "I think it's time we clear something up for everyone," I said, returning to the table with a blue folder. I placed it gently on the table, opened it, and pointed to the top page. "This is the deed to the house. And this right here," I said, tapping the document, "is my name. Only my name." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. The only sound was Helen's fork gently touching her plate. Her face flushed. She looked at the paper, then at me, then at Ethan. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. "You were kind to help us, and we've always appreciated that. But help doesn't mean ownership, I added. Helen sat there, frozen. Then, slowly, she stood, picked up her purse, and walked out. No dramatic exit, no shouting, just quiet footsteps and the soft click of the gate behind her. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted. Her gossip would still spread, maybe, but now it wouldn't stick. After Helen walked out that Sunday, the air in the house felt lighter, like someone had finally opened a window after years of stale tension. Ethan and I sat at the table in silence for a while. He looked like he had something to say, but didn't know how to start. "You okay?" he finally asked, his voice low. I nodded, not because I was fine, but because I was exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. For years, I had tolerated whispers, subtle digs, and little invasions disguised as concern. But that afternoon, for the first time, I had drawn a line. A real one. In ink and on paper. "I'm tired of being disrespected in my own home," I said, pushing my plate away. "And I'm tired of pretending her behavior is normal." Ethan reached across the table, took my hand and squeezed it. I know. I should have done something sooner. I appreciated his words. But it wasn't just about him, it was about boundaries. And mine had been crossed too many times. The following week, something strange happened. For the first time in months, Helen didn't show up unannounced. No knocking at the door with leftover pie that somehow turned into an hour-long critique of our furniture choices. No texts about family dinners we were guilt-tripped into attending. It was quiet, unnaturally quiet. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. But instead of confrontation, there was gossip, a new kind. This time, it reached me through neighbors who didn't know when to keep their curiosity to themselves. On a Tuesday morning, while trimming the rose bushes out front, I heard the gate creak. It was Carol from across the street. Sweet woman, early 60s, always in a pastel tracksuit. "Hi, Olivia. Lovely morning, isn't it?" "It is," I replied, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. She stood there for a moment, almost hesitating. Then she leaned in slightly and whispered like we were in the middle of a spy novel. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I heard Helen talking to Donna at the book club yesterday. She's telling people you're kicking her out of her own home. Said you're ungrateful." I took a deep breath, not in surprise, but in quiet preparation. "Because I knew this would come. Thanks for letting me know, Carol. But there's a difference between telling your story and telling a story that isn't yours to begin with." Carol raised her eyebrows, impressed. "Good for you, sweetheart. I just wanted to say, I've seen how hard you work. And frankly, it's about time someone stood up to her." That meant more than I let on. I smiled, waved goodbye, and went back to pruning. Later that day, I sat down with Ethan to talk seriously. Not about Helen, specifically, but about us. "I don't want this house to be a war zone," I said. "It was supposed to be our safe place." He nodded slowly. "You're right. And I don't want you to feel like you're constantly defending your own home. That's not fair." We made a decision that evening. No more unannounced visits. No more bending over backward for the sake of keeping the peace. We would still show respect, but it had to go both ways. To make it clear, we drafted a message together. Polite but firm. "Hi, Helen. We wanted to let you know that moving forward, we'd appreciate a quick text or call before any visits. We value our space and privacy, and we hope you understand. Thanks." We sent it. Simple. Direct. And within 5 minutes, the reply came. "Wow. After all I've done for you, too." Noted. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just guilt in a neatly typed sentence. But we didn't respond. For once, silence felt like the louder message. The next weekend, I invited some of my friends over for coffee. It had been months since I'd seen them without Helen popping in. We sat on the porch, laughing, sipping iced tea, talking about anything but family drama. I felt like myself again, like a version of me I hadn't seen in a while. One of them, Jenna, looked around and said, Your house has such a peaceful energy. And for the first time, I believed it too. But peace, as I would soon find out, doesn't always last. The next twist came when Helen decided to escalate the situation, not with words, but with appearances. One morning, I came out to grab the mail and saw a for sale sign on her front lawn. She lived just 2 blocks away, in a tidy little bungalow that she had inherited from her sister. But apparently, after our disrespect, she no longer felt welcome in the neighborhood. Or maybe she had another plan, and I had a bad feeling I hadn't heard the last of her yet. When I saw the for sale sign go up in front of Helen's house, my first reaction was confusion. Why now? She had lived in that little bungalow for over 15 years. It was cozy, well-kept, and paid off. She used to brag about how she'd never be at the mercy of rent again. And yet there it was, a bold red and white sign planted into the grass like a declaration of war. Ethan didn't know either. He found out the same way I did, by glancing out the window while brewing coffee. She didn't mention anything to me, he said, rubbing his temples. Are you surprised? I asked. He didn't answer. A few days later, we got a clue. Carol, yes, same pastel tracksuit Carol, popped over again while I was pulling weeds in the front yard. She didn't waste time. Word is, Helen is moving in with someone. And you're not gonna like who. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my gloves. Go on. She's been talking to your sister-in-law. You know, the one who moved to Charleston last year? Ashley. Helen's planning to sell her house and move in with her. I blinked. Ashley and Helen had a famously rocky relationship. Helen had once told me Ashley burned toast on purpose just to spite her. And now they were going to live under the same roof. Something didn't feel right. Over the next week, Helen made her rounds through the neighborhood. She visited her favorite people one by one. Donna, who organized the church bake sale. Joe, who always helped with everyone's Christmas lights. Even Mr. Harold, the 82-year-old retired dentist who could barely hear a thing. And in every visit, the same line slipped from her lips. Olivia and Ethan made it clear I'm not wanted, so I'm moving on. She played the victim. And it worked. One morning, a kind neighbor named Peter stopped me while I was jogging. Hey, just wanted to say I hope everything's okay. Helen's been through a lot. I didn't respond. I just nodded and kept moving. But what really caught my attention was the sudden presence of a real estate agent in Helen's driveway. A tall man in a fitted blazer with a clipboard and a camera. I watched from our kitchen window as Helen gestured dramatically, pointing at different corners of her yard, showing him where the sunlight hits just right in the mornings. It wasn't just a move. It was a show. And we were the unwilling co-stars. Ethan, for his part, tried to stay neutral. He told me he didn't want to make things worse. But I reminded him that pretending not to see a problem doesn't make it disappear. It just gives it space to grow. She's creating a narrative, Ethan, I told him. And she's making sure everyone sees it through her lens. He sighed. So what do we do? Hold a press conference. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I was tired. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, everything came to a head. I had just finished folding laundry when I heard the doorbell ring. I opened it and found Helen standing there. No smile, no pie, no small talk. Can we talk? She asked. I stepped aside, motioned her in. She walked with the air of someone rehearsing a speech. She sat at the kitchen table, looked around like she was taking inventory, and then locked eyes with me. I've been thinking, she began, that maybe we could find a way to fix things. I raised an eyebrow. You mean now that you've told half the town I kicked you out? She flinched but didn't deny it. I was hurt, she said. You humiliated me. You pulled out that paper in front of everyone. I crossed my arms. And you've been telling everyone that this house is yours for over a year. You claim to have paid for it entirely, which isn't true. You gave us a generous gift for the down payment. That doesn't mean ownership. She didn't speak right away. Then, with a sigh, she pulled something from her purse and placed it on the table. It was an envelope. "What's this?" "My closing documents," she said flatly. "The house is under contract. I'll be gone by the end of the month." I stared at her, stunned. "So, this is it?" She gave a slow nod. "I'm not welcome here." "I get it. So I'm moving. But I want you to know something, Olivia. No matter what's written on that piece of paper," she gestured toward my countertop, where the deed folder still sat, "this house always felt like mine because I helped build this family." Her words stung, not because I agreed, but because I knew she believed them. She stood, straightened her blouse, and looked at me one last time. "Take care of my son." And just like that, she walked out. No tears, no shouting, just the quiet footsteps of someone retreating from a battle she no longer believed she could win. The door closed. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the envelope, at the deed, at the walls I had painted, the floors I had scrubbed, the life I had fought to claim. I knew peace would still take time, but for the first time in years, it was finally possible. The days after Helen's departure were quiet, not silent in a bad way, more like the kind of quiet that follows a long, exhausting storm, the kind that lets you breathe differently. I hadn't realized how much of my energy had been wrapped up in defending my space, my decisions, my existence, until I no longer had to. Ethan seemed lighter too, even if he didn't say much. One morning, as we were having coffee in the kitchen, he looked up from his mug and said softly, "It really does feel like home now." And that, somehow, meant more to me than all the apologies Helen had never given. Helen kept her word. By the end of the month, her bungalow was empty. The "for sale" sign had a red "sold" sticker slapped across it, and a moving truck sat outside for a single afternoon. No dramatic goodbyes, no final attempt to rewrite the story, just boxes, silence, and the sound of a fresh start, though not ours this time, but hers. She moved to Charleston, just as Carol said, to live with Ashley. I received a short, emotionless text. "I've arrived. Things are fine. Please tell Ethan I'm well." No emoji. No love. Just a statement. A final line in the chapter she had closed. But what surprised me was how the neighborhood responded after she left. A week later, I was walking to the mailbox when Donna from down the street stopped me. She looked around as if making sure no one else was listening. "I owe you an apology," she said, clearing her throat. "For what?" "For believing her without asking you first. Helen made it sound like you were just living here for free. Like she rescued you both. But I've seen the way you care for this house. The way you work. The way you hold your head high. I should have known better." It caught me off guard. Not because I needed the validation, but because it reminded me how powerful narratives can be when no one challenges them. Helen had used her voice like a shield, keeping people on her side with half-truths and sweetly poisoned words. But now, without her presence, the truth had space to breathe. Others followed. Peter waved at me while watering his plants. Joe offered to help me hang new string lights on the porch. Even Carol brought over lemon bars one afternoon, saying, "You were right to stand up for yourself. Some people need reminders of where the lines are." I finally felt part of the community, not as someone's plus one, not as the daughter-in-law, but as me. Ethan and I slowly began to reclaim every inch of the house emotionally. We repainted the guest room, once unofficially claimed by Helen, with a soft sage green. We turned it into a reading space, a place of quiet and calm. We planted tomatoes in the backyard, something I had always wanted to do but never dared while Helen was around, claiming the soil was too dry for vegetables. The tomatoes thrived. One Sunday morning, as we sat on the back steps with coffee in hand, I turned to Ethan and said, "I know it wasn't easy for you. She's your mom." He nodded slowly. "It wasn't. But I think deep down, I always knew she needed to be challenged. I just didn't know how to do it without making things worse." I leaned my head on his shoulder. Sometimes doing what's right does make things worse for a while. But then, it gets better. He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I knew we were building something new, not just a life, but a legacy. One where boundaries weren't seen as rejection, but as respect. Where generosity didn't equal entitlement. And where love wasn't about control, but care. Weeks turned into months. The house grew quieter, yes, but in that quiet, something beautiful bloomed. Autonomy, clarity, and peace. Helen still calls Ethan occasionally. Their conversations are short, polite, distant. I don't ask about them, and he doesn't offer much. It's better that way for now. As for me, I don't hold bitterness. I hold memory. And every time I pass by the deed folder tucked away safely in the drawer, I don't smile because my name is on it. I smile because of what that name represents. Strength, patience, and the courage to claim what is rightfully mine, not with noise, but with truth. And that's a kind of ownership no one can ever take away.